The gunshot echoed across the Montana territory like the last gasp of a dying day, leaving Grace Whitfield clutching her husband's bloodied body as dust settled around them. Montana, 1876, was no place for mercy, and the stagecoach robbery that claimed Thomas Whitfield's life left behind a widow with 2 young children and a ranch too big for her hands alone. "Mama, when's Papa coming home?" Little Emma asked for the 100th time that week, her 5-year-old eyes still searching the horizon from their cabin porch. Grace swallowed hard, stroking her daughter's golden hair. "Remember what I told you, sweetheart. Papa's gone to heaven. But who's going to teach Samuel to ride? Who's going to fix the roof when it leaks?" Emma's questions were daggers to Grace's heart. 3-year-old Samuel toddled out onto the porch, dragging his father's old hat behind him. "Papa hat," he said, holding it up to Grace with hopeful eyes. Grace gathered both children into her arms, fighting back tears. She couldn't afford to cry anymore. Crying wouldn't put food on the table or keep the Circle W ranch going. Thomas had built everything from nothing, and she was determined not to let it slip away. The ranch hands had already started drifting away, seeking more certain employment. Without Thomas's leadership, they claimed, the place would fold by winter. Grace had begged them to stay, offering shares in the next cattle drive, but most saw only a doomed widow clutching at straws. "Mrs. Whitfield," the call came from the dusty trail leading to their homestead. Grace shaded her eyes against the setting sun to see a lone rider approaching. His silhouette was unmistakable, tall in the saddle, wide-brimmed hat, shoulders squared against the fading light. "Children, go inside," Grace instructed, reaching for the shotgun that now rested by the door. Visitors could mean trouble, especially for a woman alone. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Madam," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Flynn Callahan. I heard in town you might be looking for help with your ranch." Grace kept the shotgun visible but lowered. "News travels fast, Mr. Callahan. What else did you hear? That Thomas Whitfield was a good man, that the men who killed him are still riding free, and that you've got 2 young ones depending on you." His gaze was direct but not challenging. "I also heard you lost most of your hands." "And what makes you think I'd hire a stranger who rides in at sunset with nothing but his word to recommend him?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Flynn reached slowly into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded letter. "I knew your husband, madam. Not well, but we drove cattle together from Texas 3 seasons back. He was fair when others weren't. Said if I ever needed work, the Circle W would have a place." Grace took the letter with trembling fingers. Thomas's handwriting leapt from the page, a brief note confirming Flynn's story. She looked up at the cowboy's weathered face, searching for deceit but finding only patient determination. "I can't pay much," she said finally. "Most of our cash went to the bank after the funeral. I don't need much, Mrs. Whitfield. A bunk in the foreman's cabin, 3 squares and fair wages when you sell your cattle." He glanced toward the main house where Emma's curious face peeked from behind the curtain. "Looks like you need more than just a ranch hand, though. What I need, Mr. Callahan, is a miracle," Grace replied honestly. Flynn settled his hat back on his head, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "I'm no miracle worker, madam, but I'm handy with cattle, horses, and a hammer. And I've got no tolerance for those who'd prey on a widow and her young ones." That night, after the children were asleep, Grace sat at her kitchen table counting what little money remained. The mortgage payment was due in 4 weeks. The cattle needed to be rounded up from the north pasture and driven to market in Helena. The roof leaked when it rained, and winter in Montana was unforgiving to the unprepared. A soft knock at the door startled her. Flynn stood on the other side, hat in hands. "Pardon the intrusion, madam, but I've been walking the property." "You've got close to 30 head wandered off to the creek valley. With your permission, I'll start gathering them at first light." Grace nodded, grateful yet wary. "Mr. Callahan, why are you really here? A man with your skills could find work on any ranch in the territory." Flynn's gaze dropped to his hat, turning it slowly in his calloused hands. "Your husband saved my life once. Bullet meant for me took his horse instead. Never got the chance to repay him." He looked up, his expression solemn. "Figure helping his family is the next best thing. And if I can't keep this ranch, if the bank takes it all, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." He settled his hat back on his head. "Try to get some rest, Mrs. Whitfield. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Dawn arrived with Flynn already in the saddle, his silhouette cutting across the pink-streaked sky as he rode toward the north pasture. Grace watched from the kitchen window as she prepared breakfast, a strange sense of relief mingling with her constant worry. Emma appeared at her side, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama, who's that man?" "His name is Mr. Callahan. He's going to help us with the ranch for a while." "Is he going to be our new papa?" Emma asked with a child's directness. Grace nearly dropped the coffee pot. "No, sweetheart. He's just a hired hand. No one could replace your papa." But as the days passed, Flynn proved himself more than just a hired hand. He mended fences, repaired the barn roof, and gradually coaxed the scattered cattle back to the home pasture. At night, he would sit on the porch steps, whittling small wooden animals for the children and telling them stories of his travels across the Western Territories. Samuel, normally shy with strangers, took to following Flynn everywhere, mimicking his bow-legged walk and attempting to wear his father's too large hat just like Flynn wore his. The little boy's attachment both warmed and worried Grace's heart. One evening, as Grace hung laundry in the yard, she overheard Samuel ask, "Mr. Flynn, can you teach me to ride like Papa was going to?" Flynn knelt to the boy's level. "If your mama says it's all right, I'll teach you, but you've got to promise to listen careful and do exactly as I say. Horses are big animals for little cowboys." "I promise." Samuel's excitement was palpable. "Then we'll start tomorrow with old Daisy. She's gentle as they come." Grace stepped around the corner. "Samuel is only 3, Mr. Callahan." Flynn stood, respectful of her authority. "My pa had me on a horse before I could walk, madam, but you're his mother. Your word is law." Grace considered the eager shine in her son's eyes. "Thomas had indeed planned to start teaching him this summer. You may teach him, but I want to be present for his lessons." Flynn's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Wouldn't have it any other way. The next morning, Grace watched as Flynn lifted Samuel onto the old mare's back. Her heart caught in her throat as her baby sat atop the enormous animal, but Flynn's hand never left the boy's back, steady and reassuring. "That's it, Samuel. Sit tall like a real cowboy," Flynn encouraged. "Your pa would be mighty proud." Samuel beamed, his small hands clutching the saddle horn. "Look, Mama, I'm riding." "You certainly are, my brave boy," Grace called, surprised by the lump in her throat. Flynn led Daisy in a slow circle around the corral, his eyes constantly checking both horse and rider. His patience with Samuel was endless, his instructions clear and kind. Grace found herself studying the cowboy more than her son, the way the Montana sun had burned his skin to leather, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, the gentle strength in his hands. When the lesson ended, Samuel was bubbling with excitement. "Can we do it again tomorrow, Mr. Flynn? Please?" "If your mama agrees and if you help me feed the chickens first," Flynn replied, lifting the boy down from the saddle. "I'll help," Samuel promised, running toward the chicken coop without waiting for Grace's permission. Flynn chuckled, leading Daisy back to the barn. "He's got his father's spirit, that one." "How would you know?" Grace asked, not unkindly. "Thomas talked about his family every night on the trail, said his boy was born stubborn and his girl was sweet as honey but twice as sticky when she set her mind to something." Flynn's expression softened. "He loved you all something fierce, Mrs. Whitfield." "Grace," she said suddenly. "Please call me Grace. Mrs. Whitfield makes me feel like my mother-in-law." Flynn nodded, a smile touching his lips. "Grace, then." As May turned to June, the ranch began to transform under Flynn's tireless efforts. 2 more hands were hired: Hank, an older cowboy with a bad leg but expert knowledge of cattle, and Joaquin, a young Mexican vaquero whose skill with horses was unmatched. Together with Flynn, they prepared for the summer cattle drive to the railroad depot at Helena. The bank, however, remained a looming threat. Mr. Perkins, the loan officer, rode out to the Circle W one afternoon, his pinched face a harbinger of bad news. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, barely acknowledging Flynn, who stood protectively nearby. "I'm afraid the bank must insist on receiving the full payment due. Your situation, while unfortunate, does not change the terms of your loan. Mr. Perkins, our cattle will fetch top dollar in Helena," Grace argued, "but we need another 2 weeks to complete the drive." "The payment is due next Friday," Perkins replied coldly. "If you cannot meet your obligation, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings." Flynn stepped forward. "Seems to me a bank would rather have a successful ranch making regular payments than an empty property nobody wants to buy." Perkins sniffed. "And you are Flynn Callahan, ranch foreman." "Well, Mr. Callahan, this is a financial matter between Mrs. Whitfield and the bank. Your input is neither required nor desired." Grace straightened her spine. "Mr. Perkins, Mr. Callahan speaks for the Circle W as its foreman. And he's right. Foreclosing now would be foolish business. I'm offering to make half the payment now and the remainder after the cattle sale." Perkins' gaze shifted between them, clearly displeased with the unified front. "Very well. Half now, half in 3 weeks. But this is the final extension, Mrs. Whitfield. The bank's patience is not infinite." After he left, Grace sagged against the porch railing. "That's almost all we have. If anything goes wrong with the drive." Flynn's hand came to rest beside hers, not touching but close enough she could feel its warmth. "Nothing's going to go wrong. We've got good cattle, good men, and a clear trail to Helena. 3 weeks from now, you'll have enough to pay off Perkins and still have a tidy sum left over." Grace wanted desperately to believe him. "How can you be so certain?" His eyes met hers, steady and clear. "Because some things are worth fighting for, Grace. This ranch, those children, their future." That night, Grace found it impossible to sleep. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her for her children, for the ranch hands who depended on her, for the legacy Thomas had built. Slipping from bed, she wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and stepped onto the porch. The night was alive with sounds: crickets chirping, cattle lowing softly in the distance, the occasional hoot of an owl. And another sound, a soft, low humming coming from the direction of the bunkhouse. Following it, Grace found Flynn sitting on a fallen log, whittling by moonlight. He stood immediately when he noticed her approach. "Grace, is everything all right? The children?" "They're fine," she assured him. "I couldn't sleep." Flynn nodded, gesturing to the log. "Care to join me? Night like this is too beautiful to waste on worrying." Grace hesitated, aware of her nightgown beneath the shawl, of the impropriety of meeting a man alone at night. But propriety seemed a distant concern compared to the ranch's troubles. She sat, leaving a respectable distance between them. "What are you making?" Flynn held up the half-finished carving a small horse taking shape beneath his knife. For Samuel, thought he might like a reminder of his first riding lesson. You're very kind to him, to both children. Grace gazed up at the star-filled sky. They've grown attached to you. They're good kids. Smart like their mama. Flynn's knife continued its steady work, shaving thin curls of wood. That Emma's got a head for numbers. Helped me count cattle yesterday and didn't miss a one. Grace smiled. She used to count eggs with her father every morning. He taught her before she could even talk properly. Tell me about him, Flynn said softly. About Thomas. The request surprised her. Most people avoided mentioning her husband as if his name might shatter her. He was stubborn, determined. When he decided on something, wild horses couldn't drag him from it. That's how he ended up here. He had a vision of building something lasting, something that would provide for generations of Whitfields. Sounds like a man who knew his mind. Oh, he did. We fought like cats and dogs sometimes. Grace smiled at the memory. But he was gentle too, never raised his voice to the children. Sang Emma to sleep every night until she was 4. Flynn's whittling slowed. You loved him very much. I did. I still do. Grace pulled her shawl tighter. Sometimes I wonder if I'm betraying that love by even considering that I might. That I could. She trailed off, unable to voice the thought. Flynn set down his knife. Grace, loving again doesn't erase what came before. The heart isn't built that way. His words touched something deep within her, some permission she hadn't realized she needed. How is it you always know exactly what to say, Flynn Callahan? Just speaking truth as I see it. His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary before returning to his carving. You should try to get some rest. Dawn comes early on a ranch. Grace nodded and stood, suddenly aware of the night's intimacy. Good night, Flynn. Good night, Grace. As she walked back to the house, Grace felt something shifting inside her, not replacing her love for Thomas, but making space alongside it. The realization was both frightening and exhilarating. The preparations for the cattle drive consumed the next days. Flynn worked from sunrise until well past sunset, organizing supplies, checking every cow and training the hands. Grace threw herself into the effort as well, packing provisions and mending clothes. The evening before departure, Flynn gathered everyone in the main house to go over final details. The children, excited by the activity, darted between the adults until Grace sent them to bed with stern instructions to stay there. The drive should take 10 days, weather permitting, Flynn explained, pointing to a map spread across the table. Joaquin will take the lead, I'll ride flank, and Hank will handle the remuda. We've got 78 head, which is a small drive but still enough to need constant attention. Grace studied the route. And you're certain you can make it back within the 3 weeks, barring disaster, yes. We should reach Helena in 10 days, complete the sale in 2 or 3, and be back with time to spare. Flynn rolled up the map. Hank, Joaquin, get some sleep. We pull out at first light. After the hands left, Flynn lingered. Grace, I wanted to discuss something with you privately. Of course. He removed a folded paper from his pocket. I've written to the sheriff in Helena about the men who killed Thomas. Gave him descriptions based on what you told me. He telegraphed back that a gang matching that description has been operating between here and the Idaho territory. Grace's breath caught. Do they know where these men are? Not yet. But the sheriff promised to alert us if they're spotted. Flynn hesitated. I hope I didn't overstep. No, Grace whispered. Thank you. Thomas deserves justice. Flynn nodded, his expression grave. Every man does. But Grace, promise me something if those men are found while I'm gone. Wait for my return before taking any action. Justice is one thing. Vengeance is another. I'm hardly likely to mount a one-woman posse, Flynn, Grace said with a small smile. I know you're stronger than you look, Grace Whitfield. His eyes held a warmth that made her cheeks flush. Just promise me you'll be careful while I'm gone. I promise. The next morning arrived misty and cool. Grace stood on the porch with Emma and Samuel, watching as Flynn and the others prepared to move the cattle. 78 head of prime beef cattle represented their future: the mortgage payment, supplies for winter, seed for next spring's planting. Flynn rode over to the porch, his horse dancing sideways beneath him. We're ready to move out. Be careful, Grace said, searching his face as if to memorize it. All of you. Mama says you're taking our cows to the city, Emma said, looking up at Flynn with wide eyes. Flynn smiled down at her. That's right, Miss Emma, and when I come back I'll bring you both a present from Helena. A real gun? Samuel asked hopefully. Samuel, Grace admonished, but Flynn just laughed. How about a book for Emma and a wooden horse to match the one I carved for you? He suggested. Samuel considered this, then nodded. Okay, but bring yourself back too, Mr. Flynn. Flynn's expression softened. That's a promise, partner. He tipped his hat to Grace. Take care of your mama while I'm gone. As the cattle drive disappeared over the ridge, Grace felt a strange emptiness settle over the ranch. She'd grown accustomed to Flynn's steady presence, his quiet confidence, the way he seemed to anticipate problems before they arose. Now, with him gone, the responsibilities of the ranch fell squarely on her shoulders again. Mama, when is Mr. Flynn coming back? Samuel asked as they walked back to the house. In about 2 weeks, sweetheart. That's a long time, Emma observed. Will you be sad until he comes back? Grace stopped, surprised by her daughter's perception. Why would you think I'd be sad? Emma shrugged. You smile more when Mr. Flynn is here, and you laugh at his stories, even the ones that aren't funny. Out of the mouths of babes, Grace thought, had she been so transparent. Mr. Flynn is a good friend who helps us with the ranch. Of course I'm happier when we have help. Emma seemed unconvinced but didn't press the issue. Grace wondered if her daughter was right. Had Flynn's presence become something more than just practical assistance? The days passed slowly. Grace kept the children busy with chores and lessons, trying to maintain a routine in Flynn's absence. She checked the fences in the south pasture, gathered eggs each morning, and tended the vegetable garden with Emma's help. At night, she would sit on the porch, watching the distant horizon where the cattle drive had disappeared, wondering how Flynn and the others were faring. On the 5th day after their departure, a rider appeared on the road to town. Grace's heart leapt, thinking Flynn had returned early, but as the figure drew closer, she realized it was Wilson Cooper, their nearest neighbor. Grace, he called, dismounting. Thought I should ride over and check on you and the young ones. That's kind of you, Wilson. We're managing well enough. Cooper removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. Heard your hands took most of your stock to Helena. Risky business, a drive that small. We had no choice. The bank isn't known for its patience. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of patience, that new foreman of yours, Callahan, is it? Known him long? Grace stiffened slightly. Mr. Callahan worked with Thomas years ago. He's proven himself reliable and hardworking. No doubt, no doubt. Cooper replaced his hat. Just curious is all. Man rides in from nowhere, takes charge of a widow's ranch. People talk, Grace. Let them talk, Grace replied, her voice cool. The Circle W is my business and no one else's. Cooper raised his hands in surrender. Meant no offense, just looking out for a neighbor. He glanced toward the barn. If you need help while your men are away, my boy Levy could ride over. Thank you, but we're managing fine. After Cooper left, Grace found herself irritated by his insinuations. The idea that Flynn might have ulterior motives seemed absurd after all he'd done for the ranch for her family. Yet Cooper's visit had planted a seed of doubt that nagged at her. How much did she really know about Flynn Callahan? That night, unable to sleep, Grace retrieved Thomas's old strongbox from beneath their bed. Inside was the letter Flynn had shown her that first day, proof of his connection to Thomas. She read it again, finding comfort in her husband's handwriting. To Flynn Callahan, a man of his word and steady in a storm. Should you ever find yourself in Montana territory, the Circle W will have work for honest hands. Thomas Whitfield. Brief and to the point, just like Thomas himself. Grace returned the letter to the box, her doubts eased. Whatever Flynn's reasons for coming to the Circle W, Thomas had trusted him. That would have to be enough. The next morning, Grace was startled awake by pounding on the front door. She hurried downstairs, rifle in hand, to find Sheriff Daniels on her porch. "Grace," he said, removing his hat. "Sorry to disturb you so early, but I've got news you need to hear." Her heart froze. "The cattle drive. Has something happened?" No, nothing about your men," Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "It's about Thomas's killers. A gang matching their description robbed the bank in Virginia City 2 days ago, shot the teller dead." Grace gripped the doorframe. "Did they capture them?" "Not yet. But they're moving this way, Grace. The territorial marshals are in pursuit, but I wanted to warn you. These men are dangerous and desperate." "Thank you, Sheriff." Daniels replaced his hat. "I'll increase patrols in the area, but you should be extra vigilant. Keep your doors locked and that rifle loaded." After he left, Grace sank into a kitchen chair, trembling. The men who had murdered Thomas were heading toward their territory, perhaps even toward the Circle W. The thought chilled her to the bone. "Mama." Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Who was that man?" "Just Sheriff Daniels with some news from town," Grace said, forcing a smile. "Why don't you help me make breakfast? Samuel will be up soon." Throughout the day, Grace found herself jumping at every sound, scanning the horizon for riders. She kept the children close to the house, making excuses about chores that needed doing inside. By evening, her nerves were stretched thin. After putting the children to bed, Grace sat at the kitchen table cleaning Thomas's old revolver. She had rarely fired it, but Thomas had insisted she learn. "Montana's no place for the helpless," he'd said. Now, with danger possibly approaching and Flynn miles away, she was grateful for his insistence. A noise from the barn startled her. Grace moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. The barn door stood partially open, swinging slightly in the breeze. She was certain she had closed and latched it earlier. Heart pounding, Grace checked that the children were sleeping soundly before taking the revolver and a lantern. She moved quietly across the yard, every sense alert. The night was unnaturally quiet, no cricket sounds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. At the barn entrance she hesitated, then pushed the door wider with the barrel of the revolver. "Who's there? I'm armed." A horse nickered softly from a stall. Grace raised the lantern, its light casting long shadows among the rafters. Nothing seemed disturbed. She was about to turn back when a voice spoke from the shadows. "You should be more careful, wandering out alone at night." Grace whirled, revolver raised, to find a man leaning against the far wall. He was rail thin, with hollow cheeks and eyes that reflected the lantern light like an animal's. "Who are you? What do you want?" Grace demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. The stranger smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Just a weary traveler looking for shelter, madam. Saw your light and thought I might beg a corner of your barn for the night. My ranch isn't a hotel. There's a town 10 miles east with proper accommodations." Grace kept the revolver trained on him. "I suggest you move along." The man pushed away from the wall, taking a step toward her. "Now that's not very hospitable. A Christian woman should show more charity." "Stop right there," Grace warned, cocking the revolver. "Not another step." The man halted, his smile fading. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. Thomas always said you were a fighter." Ice washed through Grace's veins. "You knew my husband." "Oh, we met briefly, right before my partner put a bullet in his chest." The man's hand moved to his waistband. "He mentioned a pretty wife and 2 young ones before he died. Thought we might pay you a visit, see if the Circle W is as prosperous as he claimed." Grace fired without hesitation. The shot went wide, splintering the wood beside the man's head. He ducked, drawing his own weapon, but Grace was already moving, extinguishing the lantern and dropping to the ground as his bullet whistled overhead. In the sudden darkness, Grace crawled behind a stack of hay bales, trying to control her ragged breathing. The barn was silent except for the nervous shuffling of horses in their stalls. "That wasn't very ladylike," the man called. "Come on out now. My friends are probably already in your house with those precious children. Wouldn't want anything to happen to them, would you?" Grace's blood turned to ice at the thought, but something in his voice rang false. If his companions were already in the house, why mention it? "Why not use the children as immediate leverage?" "You're lying," she called. "You're alone." A harsh laugh. "Willing to bet your children's lives on that?" Grace's mind raced. If there were others, they would have revealed themselves by now. This man was a scout, checking the ranch before bringing his companions. She had to end this now. Remembering the barn's layout, Grace moved silently toward the rear stall where they kept the old plow horse. If she could circle behind the intruder. A floorboard creaked beneath her foot. Instantly, a shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the stall door beside her. Grace dropped to the ground again, panic threatening to overwhelm her. "I can do this all night," the man taunted. "But I'm growing impatient. Show yourself, Mrs. Whitfield." Grace took a deep breath. Thomas had taught her to shoot, had insisted she learn to defend herself and the children. "A Whitfield never backs down," he'd often said. She wouldn't start now. She heard the man moving, his boots scraping against the barn floor as he searched for her. Calculating his position based on the sound, Grace waited until he passed the horse trough, then rose from her hiding place. "Looking for me?" she challenged. The man spun, raising his pistol, but Grace had already squeezed the trigger. The report was deafening in the confined space. The intruder staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, his gun clattering to the floor. "You shot me," he gasped, sounding more surprised than pained. "And I'll shoot you again if you move," Grace warned, keeping the revolver steady despite her trembling hands. "Where are the others? The men who helped you kill my husband?" The wounded man sank to his knees, blood seeping between his fingers. "Camped 3 miles south. Waiting for me to signal that the ranch was unprotected." His eyes darted to the barn door. "They'll come looking when I don't return." Grace's mind raced. She couldn't defend the ranch against multiple attackers, not with 2 children to protect. They needed to leave immediately. "Get up," she ordered, slowly. "I need a doctor," the man whined. "You need to worry about bleeding to death before your friends arrive," Grace replied coldly. "Now move, we're going to the house." At gunpoint, she marched the wounded man across the yard. Inside, she bound his hands and feet with rope, then gagged him with a dish towel. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, a painful but not immediately fatal wound. "Mama," Emma's frightened voice came from the stairs. "I heard a loud noise." "Everything's all right, sweetheart," Grace said, positioning herself to block Emma's view of the bound man. "But we need to leave the ranch for a little while. Go wake your brother and put on your shoes." "Are we going to town?" "No, we're going to find Mr. Flynn." "It's an adventure, but we must hurry." While Emma roused Samuel, Grace quickly gathered essentials: food, water, blankets, ammunition. Her mind calculated distances and directions. The cattle drive would be halfway to Helena by now, following the river valley northward. If she could intercept them, Within minutes, Grace had hitched the wagon and loaded the children, still sleepy and confused. The wounded intruder she left tied in the root cellar secure enough to hold him until help arrived, but not so inhumane as to leave him to die of his wound. "Mama, I'm scared," Samuel whimpered as Grace urged the horses forward. "There's nothing to be afraid of," she assured him, though her own heart pounded with fear. "We're going to find Mr. Flynn, that's all." "Is the bad man coming after us?" Emma asked, more perceptive than her years warranted. Grace hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Some bad men might come to our ranch. That's why we're leaving for a little while, but Sheriff Daniels is looking for them, and Mr. Flynn will protect us when we find him." They traveled through the night, following the cattle trail northward. Grace kept the wagon moving at a steady pace, not fast enough to exhaust the horses but with urgency in every mile. The children eventually fell asleep, huddled together beneath blankets, but Grace remained vigilantly awake, scanning the moonlit landscape for any sign of pursuit. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles. Grace allowed a brief stop to rest the horses and let the children stretch their legs. Her body ached from tension and fatigue, but fear kept her alert. "How much farther to Mr. Flynn?" Samuel asked, munching on a biscuit from their provisions. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. We need to follow the cattle trail until we find them." Emma studied her mother's face. "Are you scared, Mama?" Grace smoothed her daughter's hair. "A little, but being brave doesn't mean never being scared. It means doing what's right even when you are scared." "Like Papa was brave." "Yes, exactly like Papa." They continued northward throughout the morning, the terrain growing rougher as they approached the foothills. Grace searched constantly for signs of the cattle drive broken branches, distinctive hoof prints, droppings. By mid-afternoon, the trail was fresh enough to give her hope they would overtake Flynn and the others by nightfall. As the sun began its westward descent, Emma suddenly pointed ahead. "Mama, look! Is that smoke?" Grace followed her daughter's gesture. In the distance, a thin column of smoke rose against the sky, a campfire. Hope surged through her. "It might be Mr. Flynn's camp. We're going to approach carefully, though." She guided the wagon off the main trail, circling to approach the camp from downwind. As they drew closer, Grace's heart leapt at the sight of cattle grazing in a meadow, the Circle W brand visible on their flanks. "Wait here," she instructed the children, securing the wagon behind a stand of trees. "I'm going to make sure it's Mr. Flynn before we go in." "Don't leave us," Samuel pleaded, clinging to her skirt. Grace knelt before him. "I'll be just over that rise. I promise I won't go far." Reluctantly, the children agreed to stay put. Grace moved cautiously through the trees, revolver ready. As she crested the small hill overlooking the camp, relief flooded through her. There was Flynn, crouched by the fire with Joaquin, while Hank tended the horses nearby. She was about to call out when a twig snapped behind her. Grace whirled, raising her gun, only to find Emma standing there, eyes wide. "Emma, I told you to stay in the wagon," Grace whispered fiercely. "I was scared," Emma admitted. "I wanted to see if you found Mr. Flynn." Before Grace could respond, Flynn's voice rang out from below. "Who's up there?" "Show yourself." "Flynn, it's Grace," she called back, standing so he could see her. Flynn's expression transformed from suspicion to shock to concern in an instant. He raced up the hillside, his long legs covering the distance in seconds. "Grace, what in God's name are you doing out here? Are you all right?" "The children, Samuel's in the wagon just beyond those trees," Grace explained quickly. "We had to leave the ranch. The men who killed Thomas, one of them came. There are others nearby." Flynn's face hardened. "Are you hurt? Did he?" "I shot him," Grace said simply. "Left him tied in the root cellar, but his companions will come looking when he doesn't return." Flynn stared at her for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. Remind me never to underestimate you, Grace Whitfield. He turned serious again. Let's get you and the children down to camp. You can tell me everything there. As they walked toward the wagon, Flynn's hand found the small of her back, a gentle, protective gesture that made Grace realize just how exhausted she truly was. Now that she had found Flynn, the fear and determination that had sustained her began to ebb, leaving bone-deep weariness in their wake. Samuel's face lit up when he saw Flynn approaching with Grace and Emma. "Mr. Flynn, Mama said we would find you." Flynn lifted the boy from the wagon, settling him on his hip with natural ease. "Your mama is the smartest, bravest woman I know, partner. You're lucky to have her." In the camp, Hank and Joaquin greeted Grace warmly, though their eyes reflected concern at her sudden appearance. Flynn quickly explained the situation while Grace got the children settled near the fire with hot food and blankets. "So these killers are heading toward the Circle W," Flynn summarized after Grace had told her story. "But they don't know you've left." "The one I shot knows," Grace pointed out. "If his friends find him, they'll know you've fled and start tracking you," Flynn finished grimly. "We need to get you somewhere safe." Hank spoke up from across the fire. "Helena's still 4 days' drive from here, but Miller's trading post is just a day east. They've got a telegraph." Flynn nodded. "We could send word to Sheriff Daniels, get the law involved properly." "And the cattle?" Grace asked. "We can't abandon the drive. The bank can wait," Flynn said firmly. "Your safety comes first. Joaquin can continue with the herd while Hank and I escort you to Miller's." Grace shook her head. "No, the cattle represent everything, the mortgage, our future. I won't jeopardize that." Flynn studied her face, recognizing the determination there. "All right. Then we all continue to Helena together, but with extra precautions. Double watches at night, no fire after dark, and the children stay close at all times." The decision made, they prepared for night. Hank and Joaquin arranged the bedrolls, creating a protected space for Grace and the children in the center of camp. Flynn checked and rechecked his rifle, his expression troubled. As the children drifted to sleep, exhausted by their ordeal, Grace approached Flynn where he sat at the edge of camp, his gaze scanning the darkening landscape. "Thank you," she said quietly, sitting beside him. "For not insisting we turn back or change course." Flynn's eyes remained on the horizon. "I understand what the ranch means to you, what it represented to Thomas." He glanced at her. "But Grace, if those men find us, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll take the children and ride for Helena without looking back, no matter what happens to me or the others." The thought of leaving Flynn behind made Grace's chest tighten painfully. "I can't promise that. You must." His voice was gentle but unyielding. "Emma and Samuel need their mother. The ranch needs its owner. I'm just a hired hand." "You're more than that," Grace whispered before she could stop herself. "You know you are." Flynn's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. He reached out slowly, his calloused hand covering hers. "Grace," a distant sound interrupted him, horses moving through brush. Flynn was on his feet instantly, rifle raised. "Wake Hank and Joaquin," he ordered in a hushed voice. "Quietly." Grace hurried to rouse the other men while Flynn moved to higher ground for a better view. By the time she returned to his side, rifle in hand, he had spotted the approaching riders. 3 men moving slow, checking the trail, he reported. "Could be them, could be just travelers." "It's them," Grace said with certainty. "I can feel it." Flynn glanced at her, then back at the distant figures. "Get the children ready to move. We'll split up. Joaquin will continue with the cattle. You, the children, Hank, and I will head east toward Miller's trading post." "Separating seems dangerous," Grace argued. "It gives us better odds." "If they're tracking you, they'll follow our trail east. The cattle will reach Helena safely, and we can telegraph for help from Miller's. Flynn's tone brooked no argument. It's the best chance for everyone. Within minutes, they had loaded the wagon and prepared to move out. Flynn helped Grace settle the still sleeping children among the blankets, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Stay close to Hank," he instructed. "I'll ride ahead to watch for trouble." "Be careful," Grace said, fighting the urge to reach for him. Flynn's eyes softened. "Always am." They traveled through the night, moving as quietly as possible across the rugged terrain. The children, sensing the tension, remained subdued even after waking, Emma holding Samuel close and whispering stories to keep him calm. By dawn, they had covered considerable distance, the trading post now just hours away. Flynn called a brief halt beside a small creek to rest the horses and allow everyone to eat. "Any sign of pursuit?" Grace asked as Flynn dismounted beside the wagon. "Nothing certain. Caught glimpse of dust to the west about an hour back, but it could have been anything." He offered her a strip of jerky. "You should eat something." Grace accepted it, suddenly aware of her gnawing hunger. "Do you think Joaquin will make it to Helena safely?" "He's the best vaquero I've ever worked with. The cattle are in good hands." Flynn's gaze strayed to Emma and Samuel, who were exploring the creek bank under Hank's watchful eye. "They're holding up well." "They're stronger than they look," Grace said with a small smile. "Like their father." "Like their mother," Flynn corrected. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the children's occasional laughter and the gentle babbling of the creek. It felt almost normal, a family outing rather than a desperate flight from danger. The peace was shattered by Hank's urgent call. "Riders coming, 3 of them moving fast." Flynn was instantly alert, scanning the horizon. "There," he pointed to dust clouds rising in the distance. "They've found our trail." "The children, get them in the wagon," Flynn ordered, already moving toward his horse. "Hank, take Grace and the children to Miller's. Don't stop for anything." "What about you?" Grace demanded, catching his arm. Flynn's expression was resolute. "I'll delay them. Give you time to reach safety." "No." Grace tightened her grip. "That's suicide, Flynn. There are 3 of them. And there are 2 children who need their mother to reach that trading post," he countered. His hand came up to cup her cheek, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "I've faced worse odds, Grace. Trust me." Before she could argue further, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, brief, fervent, a promise without words. "Go, now." Hank was already loading the children into the wagon. "Come on, Mrs. Whitfield. We need to move." With one last anguished look at Flynn, Grace climbed aboard. As Hank snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward, she watched Flynn position himself behind a large boulder, rifle ready, facing the approaching threat alone. The wagon bounced and jolted over the rough terrain, each minute taking them farther from Flynn. Grace held the children close, her heart torn between the safety of her little ones and the man she'd left behind. "Are the bad men coming, Mama?" Samuel asked, his small face pinched with worry. "Mr. Flynn is making sure they don't reach us," Grace answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Emma, perceptive as always, studied her mother's face. "Is Mr. Flynn going to get hurt?" Grace swallowed hard. "I don't know, sweetheart, but Mr. Flynn is very brave and very clever." "Like Papa was?" Samuel asked. "Yes," Grace whispered, "just like Papa." The distant crack of rifle fire made Grace flinch. One shot, then another, followed by several in rapid succession. The children huddled closer to her, frightened by the sounds. "Hank," Grace called to the driver, "how much farther to Miller's?" "Another hour, maybe less if we push the horses," he replied, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Should reach the main road soon." More gunshots echoed across the landscape. Grace counted them, trying to determine who was firing, who might be hit. The children whimpered with each report. Suddenly, Hank cursed and yanked on the reins. "Hold tight." Grace looked up to see two riders emerging from a stand of trees directly ahead, cutting off their path. Hank tried to veer the wagon around them, but one of the men fired, the bullet splintering the wagon seat inches from Hank's leg. "Stop the wagon or the next one goes through you," the rider shouted. Hank had no choice but to pull the team to a halt. The two men approached cautiously, guns trained on the wagon. "Well, well," the first man said, a cruel smile twisting his features. "Mrs. Whitfield, I presume?" "My friend said you were a pretty little thing." His gaze shifted to the children. "And these must be the Whitfield youngsters." Grace pushed Emma and Samuel behind her. "What do you want? We have little money." The man laughed. "This was never about money, madam. Your husband interfered in business that wasn't his concern. He needed to be taught a lesson. And now so do you." "Leave my mama alone," Samuel cried, trying to squirm out from behind Grace. "Brave little man," the outlaw mocked. "Just like his pa, I bet. Look how that turned out for him." Hank slowly reached for the rifle stowed beneath the seat, but the second man noticed. "Don't try it, old-timer," he warned, cocking his pistol. Grace's mind raced desperately. Where was Flynn? Had he been killed in the gunfight they'd heard? And where was the third man who had been following them? As if in answer to her unspoken question, a lone rider appeared on the ridge behind them, but it wasn't Flynn. It was the third member of the gang, his arm in a crude sling. With a jolt, Grace recognized him as the man she had shot at the ranch. "That's her," he called, his voice tight with pain. "She's the one who put a bullet in me." The first outlaw's eyes narrowed. "Seems you've got spirit, Mrs. Whitfield. Shame to waste it." He gestured with his gun. "All of you down from the wagon. Now," Grace helped the children down, keeping them close. Hank stood protectively near them, though without a weapon he could do little. "What now, Rance?" the wounded man asked. "Kill them and be done with it," the leader Rance seemed to consider. "The woman and the old man, yes, the kids." He shrugged. "Could sell them to that trader heading to California. He's always looking for fresh merchandise." Horror washed through Grace. "No, please, the children have done nothing. Take me, but leave them alone." Rance laughed. "Ain't you sweet, offering yourself up, but I make the decisions here." He raised his gun, aiming at Grace. "Say goodbye to your mama, kids." Grace closed her eyes, pulling the children against her. "I love you," she whispered to them. "Be brave." The shot that rang out wasn't from Rance's gun. His eyes widened in shock as a red stain blossomed on his chest. He toppled from his horse without another sound. The other outlaws whirled toward the source of the shot. Flynn stood 30 yards away, rifle smoking, already taking aim at the second man. Before the outlaw could fire, Flynn's second shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The wounded man from the ranch tried to flee, spurring his horse desperately, but a third shot from Flynn's rifle brought the animal down. The rider tumbled to the ground with a cry of pain. "Grace! Children, are you hurt?" Flynn called, running toward them, reloading his rifle as he moved. "We're all right," Grace answered, her voice shaking with relief and lingering fear. "Flynn, behind you!" The second outlaw had regained his feet and drawn his pistol. Flynn spun, firing from the hip. The outlaw jerked backwards, then crumpled to the ground. Silence fell across the small clearing, broken only by the frightened whinnies of the horses and Samuel's muffled sobs against Grace's skirt. Flynn approached cautiously, checking each fallen man to ensure they posed no further threat. 2 were dead. The man from the ranch, the one Grace had shot, lived still, clutching his newly wounded leg and moaning. "Hank, tie him up," Flynn instructed. "We'll take him to Miller's and telegraph for the sheriff." With the immediate danger past, Flynn finally turned his full attention to Grace and the children. Samuel broke free from Grace's grasp and ran to Flynn, wrapping his small arms around the cowboy's legs. "You saved us, Mr. Flynn. You shot the bad men just like in your stories." Flynn knelt, gently disentangling the boy. "Are you okay, partner? They didn't hurt you," Samuel shook his head solemnly. "I was scared, but Mama said to be brave like Papa." "Your Mama is right. You were very brave." Flynn looked up as Grace approached with Emma. "All of you were." Grace couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she stepped forward and threw her arms around Flynn's neck, holding him tightly as relief overwhelmed her. His arms came around her and the children, strong and secure. "I thought we'd lost you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Never," Flynn murmured. "I made a promise, remember." They remained that way for a long moment, a family embracing in the aftermath of terror, finding solace in each other's safety. Finally, Flynn gently pulled back. "We should get to Miller's," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Report what happened. Send for the sheriff." The journey to the trading post passed without further incident. Flynn rode beside the wagon, his presence a constant reassurance. The children, exhausted by fear and excitement, slept curled together on the wagon bed. "How did you find us?" Grace asked quietly, not wanting to wake Emma and Samuel. "I thought you were holding those men off back at the creek." Flynn's expression darkened. "I was. Shot one of them, but the other two circled around. When I realized they were heading to cut you off, I followed as fast as I could." He glanced at her. "Nearly lost my mind when I saw them confronting you." "You saved our lives," Grace said simply. Flynn shook his head. "You would have found a way, Grace. You're stronger than you know." At Miller's trading post, they were greeted with astonishment and concern. Mr. Miller, the proprietor, immediately sent a telegram to the territorial marshal while his wife tended to the children, feeding them hot stew and fresh bread. The surviving outlaw was locked in a storage shed under guard until the law could arrive. According to the telegram that returned within hours, Marshal Parker would arrive the following day to take custody of the prisoner and investigate the deaths of the other gang members. That evening, after the children had been settled in a small room above the trading post, Grace found Flynn sitting alone on the front porch, staring at the starlit sky. "The children are finally asleep," she said, taking a seat beside him. "Samuel wants to know if you'll teach him to shoot when he's older." Flynn smiled faintly. "That boy has too much of his father in him. And his mother, apparently. I never thought I'd shoot a man. You did what you had to do to protect your family." Flynn's gaze remained on the stars. "That's what matters." A comfortable silence settled between them. Grace studied Flynn's profile in the moonlight, the strong jaw, the slight crinkles around his eyes, the weariness that hung about him now that the danger had passed. "What happens next?" she asked finally. "After the marshal comes?" Flynn turned to look at her. "Joaquin should reach Helena with the cattle in 3 days. Once the marshal has taken statements, we could catch up to him there, complete the sale. And then we return to the Circle W, pay off the bank, prepare for winter." Flynn hesitated. "Unless you've reconsidered staying." Grace's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "After everything that's happened, the danger, the violence, no one would blame you for wanting to leave. Take the children somewhere safer, start fresh." "Is that what you think I should do?" Flynn's eyes held hers steadily. "I think you should do whatever brings you and those children happiness. The Circle W is just land, Grace. Home is wherever you make it." "And where is your home, Flynn Callahan?" Grace asked softly. "Where will you go when this is all settled?" Flynn looked away, his expression unreadable. "I haven't had a real home since I was a boy. Been drifting so long, I'm not sure I'd recognize home if I found it." "I think you would," Grace said. Her hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. "I think home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's people." Flynn's grip tightened on hers. "Grace." His voice was rough with emotion. "I have no right to ask anything of you. You're still grieving Thomas." "I'll always love Thomas," Grace acknowledged. "He gave me Emma and Samuel, the ranch, years of happiness, but my heart didn't die with him, Flynn. These past months, watching you with the children, seeing your dedication to the ranch, to us." She took a deep breath. "I've found room in my heart for new feelings." Flynn turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek. "I never intended this," he admitted. "Came to the Circle W to honor a debt to Thomas, nothing more. But then I met you, your strength, your kindness, the way you love those children." He shook his head, wonderment in his eyes. "How could I not fall in love with you?" The words hung in the air between them, honest and powerful. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of release, of possibility. "The children adore you," she whispered. "Especially Samuel. He needs a father." Flynn's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "And what do you need, Grace?" "Someone to share the burden. Someone to laugh with, cry with. Someone who sees me as more than just a widow with responsibilities." Her eyes met his. "I need you, Flynn." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Flynn leaned forward. His lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing certainty. Grace's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally parted, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Grace Whitfield. You and those children. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay not as your foreman but as your partner, in everything." Grace smiled through her tears. "I think I'd like that very much." They were interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. "Mama, Mr. Flynn." They turned to find Samuel standing there in his nightshirt, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Flynn immediately stood and went to the boy, lifting him into his arms. "What's wrong, partner? Bad dream?" Samuel nodded against Flynn's shoulder. "The bad men were chasing us again." "Well, the bad men can't hurt you anymore," Flynn assured him. "I promise." Samuel studied Flynn's face with a child's solemn intensity. "Are you going to be my new papa?" The question hung in the air. Flynn glanced at Grace, uncertainty in his eyes. She moved to stand beside them, her hand coming to rest on Flynn's arm. "Would you like that, Samuel?" she asked gently. Samuel nodded. "You could teach me to ride and shoot and rope cattle, and you could fix the roof when it rains, and you wouldn't have to sleep in the bunkhouse anymore." Flynn chuckled, the sound warm and rich in the night air. "Those are good reasons, partner," Samuel frowned, considering. "But what would I call you? You're not my real papa." A shadow of pain crossed Flynn's face, but he answered honestly. "Your real papa will always be your papa, Samuel. Nothing changes that. He loved you very much. But if you married Mama, you'd be my papa too, right?" "That's right," Flynn said softly. Samuel's face brightened. "Then I could call you Pa Flynn, and my real papa would be Papa Thomas in heaven." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes again at her son's simple solution. Flynn seemed equally moved, his voice rough when he replied. "I think that sounds just fine, Samuel." "So you will marry Mama?" Samuel pressed, a child's persistence cutting through adult hesitation. Flynn looked at Grace, love shining in his eyes. "If your Mama will have me, yes." "Mama," Samuel turned expectantly to Grace. Grace laughed through her tears. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry Mr. Flynn." Samuel beamed with satisfaction. "Good. Can I tell Emma when she wakes up?" "You can tell her in the morning," Grace said, taking him from Flynn's arms. "Right now, little cowboys need their sleep." As she carried Samuel back inside, the boy waved over her shoulder. "Good night, Pa Flynn." "Good night, partner," Flynn called softly, his voice thick with emotion. When Grace returned to the porch after settling Samuel, she found Flynn staring into the distance, his expression thoughtful. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, only half joking. Flynn turned to her with a smile. "Just thinking how life takes unexpected turns. 6 months ago, I was a drifting cowhand with nothing but my horse and saddle. Now," he shook his head in wonder, "now I'm about to have a family, a home." "Are you sure it's what you want?" Grace asked. "The Circle W isn't just land, it's responsibility, hard work, children who will look to you as their father." Flynn's hands came to rest on her shoulders. "Grace, I've spent my life working other men's land, tending other men's cattle, always moving on before I could put down roots. The thought of having something of my own, someone of my own, it's all I've ever wanted but never thought I deserved." Grace reached up to touch his face. "You deserve happiness, Flynn. We all do." 2 days later, Marshal Parker arrived to take custody of the surviving outlaw. After hearing their account of events, he confirmed what they already knew: the men were part of a gang that had been terrorizing the territory for months. Thomas had apparently witnessed them robbing a stagecoach and attempted to intervene, making himself a target for their vengeance. "Your husband was a brave man, Mrs. Whitfield," the marshal said, "and you've shown the same courage. The territory owes you a debt of gratitude for helping bring these killers to justice." With the immediate danger past, they prepared to continue to Helena to complete the cattle sale. Before leaving Miller's trading post, Flynn had a private conversation with Mr. Miller that left the trader smiling and Flynn surprisingly nervous. As they set out, Grace noticed Flynn checking his pocket repeatedly. "Did you lose something?" she asked as they rode side by side, the children dozing in the wagon behind them with Hank at the reins. "Not exactly," Flynn replied cryptically. "Just making sure something's still there." They reached Helena 3 days later, finding Joaquin with the cattle safely corralled at the stockyards. The drive had been successful, every head accounted for, and the market prices even better than they'd hoped. "You did well, Joaquin," Flynn praised, clapping the young vaquero on the shoulder. "Better than well." Joaquin grinned. "The cows, they behave for me. They know I do not tolerate nonsense." With the cattle sold and the money secured, they spent one night in Helena to rest and purchase supplies. Flynn disappeared for an hour that evening, returning with a mysterious package that he refused to explain. The journey back to the Circle W was leisurely compared to their flight to Miller's. The children rode happily, asking every few miles when they would reach home. Flynn and Grace shared frequent glances, their newfound understanding adding sweetness to each mile. On their final night on the trail, after the children were asleep and Hank and Joaquin had retired to their bedrolls, Flynn took Grace's hand and led her a short distance from camp. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not fancy, and if you don't like it, we can find something better in town." He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold band. The moonlight caught it, making it glow warmly against his calloused skin. "I had Mr. Miller send a telegram to a jeweler in Helena," Flynn explained. "Asked him to have something ready when we arrived. Told him it was for the bravest, most beautiful woman in the Montana Territory." Grace stared at the ring, her heart swelling. "Flynn, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards," he continued, suddenly uncertain. "And I know I'm asking you to take a chance on a man who spent most of his life with no fixed address. But Grace, I promise you this: I will love you and those children until my dying day. I'll work alongside you to make the Circle W everything Thomas dreamed it could be. I'll be there when the roof leaks, and when the cattle need driving, and when Samuel takes his first ride alone." He took a deep breath, then knelt before her, the ring held between them. "Grace Whitfield, will you marry me?" Grace felt tears spring to her eyes for what seemed the 100th time that week. "Yes, Flynn Callahan, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, Grace felt Thomas's presence not as a ghost or a barrier, but as a blessing. He had loved her enough to want her happiness above all else. She knew in her heart he would approve of the man who now held her, the man who would help raise his children. They reached the Circle W the following afternoon. Sheriff Daniels had been by to check on the property during their absence. And aside from some disruption in the root cellar where the wounded outlaw had been imprisoned, everything was as they had left it. That evening, after the children had been bathed and fed, Flynn sat with them on the porch steps, whittling a new wooden horse for Samuel while Emma practiced her letters. "Mr. Flynn," Emma said suddenly, looking up from her slate, "Mama says you're going to marry her and be our new papa." "That's right," Flynn answered, his knife pausing in its work. "How do you feel about that?" Emma considered the question with all the seriousness a 7-year-old could muster. "Will you make Mama sad sometimes, like Papa did when they argued?" Flynn set down his knife. "Your Mama and I will probably disagree sometimes, Emma. All people who care about each other do. But I promise I will always treat her with respect, and I will never stop trying to make her happy." Emma nodded, satisfied. "And will you love us the same as if we were your real children?" Flynn's throat tightened. "Emma, you and Samuel are already my real children in all the ways that matter. I loved you both from the moment I saw you, even though we weren't yours. Especially because you weren't mine, because I had to earn your trust and your affection." Flynn reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Family isn't just about who made you, Emma. It's about who loves you, who protects you, who helps you grow into the person you're meant to be." Emma considered this, then asked, "What should I call you? Samuel wants to call you Pa Flynn." Flynn smiled. "You can call me whatever feels right to you. Flynn is fine. Mr. Flynn is fine. Or anything else you choose." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said simply, "I think I'll call you Papa Flynn, because Papa is already in heaven, but you're here to be our Papa now." Flynn swallowed hard against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "I'd be honored, Emma. Truly honored." 2 weeks later, Pastor Mitchell from the church in town came to the Circle W to perform a simple ceremony. Sheriff Daniels and his wife attended, along with the Coopers from the neighboring ranch and a few other friends. Hank stood as Flynn's best man, while Mrs. Cooper helped Grace prepare. The children watched wide-eyed as their mother, dressed in a simple blue dress with wildflowers in her hair, promised to love Flynn for all her days. When Flynn promised the same in return, his voice was steady and sure. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Mitchell concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Callahan, you may kiss your bride." As Flynn leaned down to kiss Grace, Samuel tugged at his sleeve. "Does this mean you're our real papa now?" The guests laughed, and Flynn knelt to the boy's level. "I'm as real a papa as any boy could have, Samuel. And you and Emma are as real children to me as any father could want." Samuel beamed, throwing his arms around Flynn's neck. Emma joined the embrace, and Flynn gathered them both close. Looking up at Grace, who watched them with tears of joy in her eyes, Flynn said the words that would shape their family's future. "I'll be the man they call father," the cowboy said as he kissed the widow's forehead, "for as long as I live." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Circle W. Flynn and Grace worked side by side to build the ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory. Emma grew into a thoughtful young woman with her mother's strength, and her both fathers' sense of justice. Samuel became Flynn's shadow, learning every aspect of ranching with eager determination. And in the spring of 1878, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, a symbol of the new life they had created together. As Flynn held his newborn daughter for the first time, with Emma and Samuel peering excitedly at their baby sister. He marveled at how completely his life had transformed. "She has your eyes," Grace said softly from the bed, watching her husband cradle their daughter. Flynn smiled, overcome with emotion. "And your spirit, I'd wager." "Another strong Whitfield woman." "Callahan," Grace corrected gently. "Hope Callahan." Flynn looked up, understanding the significance. Thomas's children would always carry the Whitfield name, honoring their birth father's legacy. But this child, their child, would carry his name forward. "Hope Callahan," he repeated, his voice rough with feeling. "Perfect." As the Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Flynn sat on the porch of their home, baby Hope sleeping against his chest while Emma read to Samuel from one of her schoolbooks. Through the open window, he could hear Grace humming as she prepared dinner. This was home, not just the land or the buildings, but the people who filled his life with purpose and love. Flynn Callahan, once a drifting cowhand with nothing to his name, had found the greatest wealth a man could possess. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Flynn made a silent promise to Thomas Whitfield to honor his memory, to raise his children with love and wisdom, to cherish the remarkable woman they had both been blessed to love. "Thank you," he whispered to the heavens, "for leading me home."